Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do.
In this episode, I interview Carolyn Elefant, creator of MyShingle.com and law firm owner, who's blazed a trail for a new generation of lawyers opting to go solo by choice and change the law for good. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm Tom Martin, your host, and I'm so thrilled today to have Carolyn Elefant on our show. She's a trailblazer. I'm very, very lucky to have her on. She is an ABA legal rebel. She is a Fast Case 50 honoree. She also won the Lifetime Achievement Award with the American Legal Technology Awards. Started her own practice in 1993, MyShingle in 2002, and many, many other accomplishments, but I'll let her speak for herself. Carolyn, it's so great to have you here. If you could just tell us a little bit about what you're up to now.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be on the show. And I guess that's the benefit of being around for a long time, is that at some point, the things that you do kind of pile up for better or for worse. So like you said, I have had a practice. My practice focuses on renewable energy and landowners impacted by pipelines. And in a couple of months, I'm actually also going to be doing some work as a hearing examiner for a regulatory agency here in the DC area. So I'm excited about acting in that capacity. I'm still blogging at myshingle.com, no less so. And I have been changing the focus more from starting a law firm, just starting a law firm, to starting a law firm, and the implications of artificial Gen AI for solo and small firm practitioners, because I think it's something they really need to know about right now. And everybody's kind of scrambling and trying to figure out what's going on. So that's kind of where things are right now for me. I've been speaking a lot on AI this year.
I know you have.
Yes, I know. We've done a couple together, and we've got one coming up too.
Yeah, but I've seen you everywhere. You've been making multiple appearances in multiple states, and I just don't know how you keep up with all of that.
It does. It is difficult to be lazy or to repurpose the material, as most speakers usually do, just because, as you know, everything is just changing almost day to day, and at least at a minimum month to month.
Yeah, the rate of change is ridiculous. But I also want to take this opportunity to thank you because, and I think I've shared this with you before, but when I started as a solo, I had been working for other lawyers and their law firms, and it's difficult when you have a boss and they have mandatory Saturdays and things like that, which I guess it's necessary to cut your teeth when you start out. But I opened my own law firm in 2006. And when I did that, of course, I think my first purchase was Jay Foonberg, right?
Yes.
Because Foonberg was like the go-to back then. But I quickly found your blog, you, Stephanie Kimbrough, Richard Granite, right?
Yes. Old modern school, though.
Yeah, but huge influences, and a lot of what you had to say, I'm sure, has guided not only myself, but thousands and thousands of other solos to find their place.
Yeah, no, I'm always surprised. And of course, I feel really good when people say that they read my book and it gave them the courage to start, because figuring out a lot of the nuts and bolts, I mean, it's nice to have all that information in one place, but even that is difficult to keep up. I mean, the Foonberg books are very good on the theory, but in terms of the technology, they really, I don't know when he last updated, but they don't really stand the test of time. And so, but I think what people need is kind of that encouragement or that support or that thought that in their head that, somebody patting them on the back saying, you can do this, the hand on the shoulder saying, this is possible. And so I feel like that's really what my blog has done and what my book has done too.
Well, it definitely has done that. I know that when, one of my influences was my father and my mom. My dad was a barber. My mom, she was a bit of an entrepreneur.
Oh.
And I'm curious, like, if we kind of like go backwards to your start, did you have influences like that encouraged you down this path?
So yeah, so it is funny that you mentioned that. My dad was a chemist. He worked for a big confectionery, drug and confectionery company. And he used to bring home new brands of gum that were available like in Asia or Europe and not yet available in the US. And so I would take the gum and then I would sell it in school. This was when I was in fourth grade and make money. And I remember I was kind of doing it under the table, so to speak. You weren't allowed to bring candy to school. And so when this boy would try to steal the gum from me, I would, I had no recourse. I couldn't tell the teacher. He couldn't do anything. So I remember one day I punched the boy in the back to the floor, and then he complained to the teacher. And the teacher's like, "What do you expect her to do? You've been stealing her gum for weeks." So that was kind of my first exposure to entrepreneurship. And my mom was always an entrepreneur. She had gone back to school when my sisters and I were very young, and she really wanted to be a teacher. But at that time, teaching jobs were very difficult to come by. It's too bad she wasn't trying now, and there's many more openings. So she wound up opening a daycare center that my sisters and I worked at. And so that was also another example of how if you wanted to do something like teach and you couldn't necessarily find employment for it, there were other solutions to be able to do it, including owning your own business. And so she ran the daycare centers for about 10 or 15 years.
Wow. So that sense of entrepreneurship that you have runs deep, huh?
Yeah, it does. It does. So that's what made it seem it starting a firm didn't seem unusual to me. It was one of many different options.
Yeah. So, okay. So still going back a little bit, like, so you went to Brandeis and Cornell, right?
Right.
And so did you start up your own, did you hang your own shingle immediately, or did you work for a firm and have that experience? How did that go?
Yeah, so during law school, I worked for a large firm in New Jersey. It had maybe 150 people. They were mostly expatriates from New York, and they prided themselves on not working as hard as the people in New York. So it meant that they had 60-hour weeks instead of 70-hour weeks or something like that. So I worked for them and I got an offer there, but I had just worked so hard during the summer. It was a very competitive firm, and they only made offers to about half of the associates who had worked there. And I was one of the ones who got the offer. And I got it because I was always working all the time. So I decided that that wasn't something I wanted to do right after I graduated. So I just came down to DC. And at that time, it was fairly easy, especially from a school like Cornell, to get a good job with the federal government. I mean, today those jobs are really difficult to come by, especially for new people. But I was still too late for like the traditional path, like the Department of Justice Honors Program. So I just sent my resume out to some agencies, and I started working at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission here in DC. And I worked there for about 2 years. I was really a go-getter back then. And after that, I went to a private energy law firm, and I started my firm after I'd been out of school for about 5 years.
Oh, okay. So you're out for 5 years when you started your own firm.
Right. So I was still relatively young because I went straight through and I was a year ahead in school. So I was still only 29 when I started my firm. But I had been practicing 5 years, although I have to say it was largely energy law, so it was very niche. But I also did a lot of pro bono work. I actually won an award for being doing so much work for the Washington Legal Clinic for the homeless. So, I had a discrimination suit for a guy who got kicked out of the hotel because he was homeless, and another, unemployment benefits cases, the kind of things you would expect, kinds of issues. And then I would do intake at the homeless shelter, which was conveniently around the corner from my house. So that was very convenient.
I remember reading that, it was on your blog, but I think you had mentioned that the pro bono work that you were doing while at FERC, like, weren't necessarily supposed to be doing that, but you did it anyway.
So what happened was, at that time there was a statute a conflict statute that was passed after the Civil War in light of all the nepotism and patronism that followed with the Reconstruction of the South, 18 USC 205. And so it prohibited anybody, it obviously prohibited, people from giving positions of nepotism, but it also prohibited people who worked for the government from taking positions or from representing clients against the government. So obviously, as a federal employee working at FERC, I wasn't going to be able to represent a client who, the IRS was coming after. But the problem that was unique to DC was that I was also barred from representing clients before DC agencies, because at that time, DC was considered to be part of the federal government, or at least the DC government was. And so for these homeless cases, when you're dealing with benefits, you're dealing with largely with the DC government, the Unemployment Office, DC Department of Health and Human Services for housing, their version of Title VII housing. And so it really would have foreclosed me from doing a lot of the pro bono work. So I wrote a letter about it, and then I wrote an article, and it turned into a law review article. I would work on it after work on my Macintosh computer, my vintage 1987 with the floppy disk. And it got published in the Georgetown Journal of Legal Ethics. And then two law professors pounced on it, and they wrote articles too. At least they cited me. And then somebody started an initiative for legislation, and the statute was changed. And my article is cited in the in the Congressional Reporter as one of the resources for changing this law. So now the way it was changed is that it actually was a broader change than what my endorsement was that unless you had a direct conflict, if you work for the federal government, you should be able to represent a client either against DC, most obviously, but even, working for FERC, if there was somebody who had a tax issue at the IRS, there didn't seem to me to be any direct conflict. And so that's how the statute was changed. And so today, the Department of Justice has one of the biggest number of pro bono attorneys, and many of them are handling cases against other DC government bodies. So it was a big change. And I learned that it's not that hard to write a law review article or get it published. So for everybody who makes out how prestigious it is to be on law review, checking footnotes, you could actually write your own article and have your name on it and have somebody else do the footnotes for you. So that was quite a delightful experience.
Well, what a fantastic positive change, and one that's desperately needed, right? Because there's no end to people that have legal problems that need help. And so you open the doors to more of that help.
Yeah. And for government attorneys, many positions at government, the position that I was in was advisory. So I didn't really have a lot of litigation experience. I was more decisional. I was reading briefs that parties submitted and writing advisory opinion. So it was more sort of like a judicial position. So being able to get hands-on experience doing an unemployment hearing or, suing the Hyatt Hotel for kicking the homeless person out who wanted to eat breakfast and he had money, that also it's a benefit to the attorneys who are able to do the pro bono work. It helps them improve their skill set.
Yeah. It also fits a little bit with the theme from the selling gum about about pursuing, having the tenaciousness to pursue something that you thought that you believed in, right? Like something that you wanted to accomplish.
Yes.
And so the next step after that was hanging out your own shingle 5 years after getting out of school. And was there any specific thing that triggered that, or was it just?
Yeah. So I had been working at a law firm doing energy work. And this was back, I guess this was by now, it was 1992 or 1993 maybe. And the economy wasn't doing great. The firm was struggling. And so they had layoffs. And so I was told that I wasn't partnership material. Now, in retrospect, I realized I actually was not associate material, because even as an associate, I was not the most compliant person in the firm. And there weren't that many associates. That was another issue with the firm. It was very partner heavy. They also had a branch in Africa that was uneconomic. So they gave me 6 months to find another position. And I looked at other energy firms. There were some that were hiring, but nothing worked out. And I had always thought about starting my own firm, and I figured, why not now? I just gotten married. I mean, my husband and I had just bought a house, so the timing wasn't ideal, but we didn't have kids. We didn't have a lot of debt except for the mortgage. And I just thought, why not just do it as a placeholder and see what happens. That was kind of the initiative. It was not anything that was planned or strategized or anything like that. It was really just to avoid an empty space on my resume.
Yeah. I have to say a lot of, maybe not a lot, but it's a good amount of the choices that I've made are based more on just feeling compelled, like really wanting to get into it, the curiosity about pursuing it, and then kind of the business part of it takes care of itself.
Yeah, yeah.
One thing I've been impressed by is you've looked at different practice areas. Like that was what you started with, but I know that when different things have come up, like there's been new potentials for niche practices. You've pursued that. What's an example of something like that?
So the first one was, I was at the time that I started my firm in energy, the industry was very different. I mean, the changes that we've seen in so many different industries, including law, like sort of the reduction of big law's influence and the rise of many smaller independent firms. We're seeing that in energy too. It used to be that energy was very utility-based, large firms did it, and now you have independent solar and wind and other developers. But when I started, it was these big companies, and they were all funding their attorneys' fees through ratepayers. And so there was really no price competition at all. I thought, I could come out and offer my services for $100 an hour instead of $300 or $400 an hour, which is what the rates were back then. And that business model didn't fly. So I realized that I was going to have to do something a little bit different. And as I was leaving the firm, I was working on some small hydroelectric projects. There was a lot of interest in developing like tiny hydro. And then related to small hydro, there's also an interest in ocean energy. And I worked on a project with an ocean energy developer. And I wrote a law review article also about the process of getting licensed for ocean energy. And then there was a small group of engineers in the DC area who were studying ocean energy. I sent them copies of my article, and I went to some of their meetings, and I started getting one or two clients who were either developing, they were, garage inventors who had this idea for using the ocean to power the universe, or else people who were starting nonprofits to study the benefits of ocean energy from the producing ocean energy. And then, that practice itself was still not entirely sustainable because the technology was really very, it wasn't even beta, whatever you call it, like 8 steps before beta.
Yeah.
It was pretty much like a step above R&D, which is very difficult to get funding for. So I was at a meeting where I met a communications person and 2 lobbyists who were working with ocean energy companies, helping them get government funding. And we decided to start a trade association. And so with the trade association, we drew the independent developers, but we also drew companies that were interested in the industry. Big law firms joined because they thought that maybe there was going to be business here. And so we grew this trade association to 55 people. And we, I worked on all aspects of the trade association, both the kind of the general counsel sort of things that you do for any kind of trade association. And then we had a sister nonprofit. We got funding from the government. So just a whole range of those tools. And we were able to, over time, we actually played a pivotal role in drafting kind of the foundational rules that today are used to lease the Outer Continental Shelf or federal lands for offshore wind farms, because the offshore wind came up after the ocean. And then with the help of our lobbyists, we helped deliver like $100 million in appropriations to the industry. So it's really blossomed since then.
Wow.
Yeah, so the trade association wound up merging with a larger trade association. Then I stopped doing that work at that time. But it was an example of how kind of there's like more than one way to skin a cat. So, if the traditional individual service to client doesn't work, there's like a whole bunch of different ways that you could go about doing that work, including trade association or, any other type of business model.
Yeah. So that also like testing the fences, just continually seeing what works, what sticks,
Right.
and the different ways that you approach it. I think that's a lesson that everyone watching this should really take to heart. Because I think sometimes, especially as lawyers, we kind of think narrowly.
Right.
And if it doesn't fit this, then what opportunity is there?
Yeah.
But not everything is like laid at our feet. Sometimes we have to make our own opportunity.
Right. Right.
Which is a segue into you publishing Solo by Choice. When you did that, why did you do that? Like it sounds like you had plenty on your plate. You had more than enough. So why take on that extra responsibility?
I think I was kind of flattered into it. I was working in my office like late at night because I used to work after my daughters went to sleep. I'd work like a couple of hours during the day, and then I'd routinely work from like 8 until 1 or 8 or 9 until 2 or something. So it was like one of those nights where I was feeling kind of tired, and I came across this. It wasn't an ad. It must have been a website for Decision Books, which at that time was the imprint for books like contract lawyering or running from the law. It kind of did these legal adjacent books. And I reached out to the publisher and sent him a link to my blog and said, I want to write a book. I guess at the time, my proposal was to write it on from big law to your law, because there really wasn't anybody who was encouraging people, who was making the case for why you should leave big law to start your own practice. And he suggested, expanding it and focusing on sort of the broader broader view. And so that's sort of how it came about. But it took a long time to write that first draft. It was probably like close to 2 years. So it kind of got squeezed between the cracks.
I mean, you were working till 2 o'clock in the morning. Did I?
Yes.
Right?
I had much more energy back then. I mean, when you have kids, you have to do, right? It just becomes your new routine until it ends. And then you look back and then you forget that you did it and you wonder how it was ever possible.
So along that line, I really, let's talk a little bit now about AI and automation and all that, because it is the new way, and it seems like a very successful strategy to use this technology to be able to accomplish a lot more. And I know you've written a lot about it and you're presenting on it. What are some concrete ways that solo and small firms can use this technology to help themselves?
There's so many different ways, and depends on, the firm and what kind of structure they have in place. But I guess for just taking an example of a true solo, just starting a practice, I mean, one of the best ways to do it is just to be able to use AI to help draft promotional copy for webinars that you might want to hold, or to help create newsletters, follow-ups with clients. I mean, a lot of that can be drafted relatively competently by, a ChatGPT or a Claude or one of those different out-of-the-box tools. I think it's also really helpful. A lot of new solos are hiring virtual assistants. Some of them are offshore, and some of them are, they have less. They're affordably priced, but they don't necessarily have as much experience with legal. And you can empower them by giving them access to AI tools to use to help draft things for your firm, like brochures and website copy. I mean, really, you can use it to expedite and speed up almost every aspect of law firm marketing. And then for like more substantive law, you can use some of the ones that are developed for legal to draft contracts, to review contracts, to do legal research, to prepare memos, to summarize transcripts. I mean, to do a lot of substantive legal work. For things to help clients with, you can, take a complicated statute and boil it down to 5 points and share it with a client. You can, come up with, what might have been like a 15-page set of instructions for depositions and, boil it down into, 10 points on a one-page sheet. And those are always things that you could do anyway, but it would take you a couple hours of time, and it would just, now it just takes seconds. So it can also help you to expand, to make your firm more friendly and accessible to clients. So there's just, I feel like there's a use in anything you do in your practice, there's some way of using it, but until you start using it, you can't really see it. It's one of those things that you actually have to use and start playing around with. And I think that's what sometimes causes lawyers to stop before they start, because lawyers are not like scientists who experiment with things. And, lawyers usually want to have some kind of solution or some kind of approach in place before they start, rather than starting with the experimental stage. So I think that's one of the things that is maybe deterring more lawyers from engaging AI at this stage.
And I think one of the figures that I saw was something like less than 20% of attorneys have even tried it.
Yeah. No, that sounds exactly right. I spoke in North Carolina to a family bar association on just last week. And when I pulled the class, it was probably 200 people in the room, and maybe about 20 or 25 raised their hands about and responded that they were using AI in their practice. Of course, I'm sure out of that room of 200, like over 100 or more had clients who are using AI and getting themselves in trouble, potentially getting themselves in trouble with it. But that's another issue.
Have you sensed a difference when it comes to like larger firm lawyers versus small and solo lawyers, that maybe solos and small firms are like more likely or more interested to use it?
I think they use them for different applications. I mean, I think at big firms, associates are always using any tool they can get their hands on. I mean, there's some really very poor quality energy research tools that are incredibly expensive, but associates will still use that just because they're supposed to be, they haven't incorporated AI yet, just using it as an example. So I think like if there's AI, if there are enterprise or law-specific AI tools at big firms, I think big firm attorneys, or at least associates, are using it just because they've got so much work to do and they're so desperate and trying to gain knowledge. I think with solo and small firms, I think it really differs in terms of the uses. I mean, and again, solo and small firms are doing a lot of their own marketing to begin with. They're doing blogs and websites and TikTok videos and need to come up with scripts. And so I think because of that, I think many solo and small firm lawyers feel more comfortable also using AI for those purposes, for emails and things. So it's hard to tell. It would be an interesting thing to see, is to see like the rates of adaptation between smaller firms and large firms. I know that smaller firms really don't have the budget for some of the more expensive AI tools that are on the market. But there are other ones that are more accessible, as you know. So including LawDroid. Shout out to LawDroid.
Well, thank you very much. But like there's so much from attorneys sometimes about these kind of false choices about, well, if I use AI, it's going to hallucinate, or that it's imperfect in some way. There's usually the argument. And how do you even try to convince people, that attorneys that have that mindset, or do you just move on to the next one that's more open-minded? Like, how do you address that when you talk to people and they're closed off about it?
So first, when I talk about things like hallucinations or inaccuracies, I point out that those have always been possible. I mean, who amongst us hasn't jumped on a Westlaw footnote or head note, whatever you call them, the head note that looks really promising, and thought, oh, I want to cite this case, and then read it and turned out to have like the opposite holding of what the head note said. So, I mean, I first try to explain that it's not necessarily, even though the output might not be accurate, you always need to verify what your work is, and you wouldn't rely on just cutting and pasting from a treatise or other resources that were led to believe that are accurate. So that's one of the arguments that I make. And then the second argument that I make is that these tools are also changing all the time. And, what we saw with the Schwartz case, was that just like a year ago? It was
Yeah.
what a long, strange year
Seems a
it's
long time
been.
ago.
But, a year ago, it's almost impossible. I have tried to prompt these AI tool, the ones that are consumer facing, not something like LawDroid or case text, but I've tried to prompt them to give me cases and they won't. I mean, it's much harder to get them to fabricate cases. So the tools are always changing. And some of them are, starting to be able to cite to sources. Now I think that they have access to the internet. They can sometimes link to something that you can check. And so they're always changing. So you might as well be in there at the beginning, and just get accustomed to using it, even if it is imperfect, because a lot of that is going to improve much more quickly than you ever would expect. So those are sort of the two arguments: the constant improvement and also the independent obligation that we've always had as attorneys to actually read the things that we cite in courts.
Yeah, it seems pretty basic, right? But sometimes apparently it's been overlooked.
Yes, it has.
Do you, are there any suggestions or recommendations you have for lawyers about disclosing the fact that they're using AI or anything along those lines?
So I'm really mixed on that. I guess it depends on who the disclosure would be to. I mean, obviously, if you're practicing at a court that has a standing order that requires you to identify your sentence by sentence use of AI and certify that you verified it, then you kind of don't have a choice in that situation. But in terms of disclosing to clients, I think it's an interesting question. And as you know, several bar associations have weighed in with ethics rulings. And I think North Carolina, Florida, and California have discussed whether to disclose to clients. And the North Carolina decision, which I read last week, had a really interesting approach, I think, that I align with, which said that, if you're handling a matter where you think it's important for the client to know that you're using AI, if you need to upload their data to the site, that's probably something you want to disclose to them. If it's a client who may have its own policies about use of AI for different things that they're working on, that may be something that you want to disclose or have a conversation to. But if it's a situation where AI is being, and it also directs lawyers to look at how substantial the use of, how critical the AI is to how mission critical the use of the AI is to the project. So if you're just using it to edit letters or to, edit a brief, you probably don't need to disclose to the clients that you're using it. But, if you're using it, as in one case we saw, to, draft your closing argument and to summarize all the evidence in the case, and you're dealing with a criminal client, you probably want to let them know what's going on. My own feeling is that I think it also depends on your clients and your firm's personality. I always like to portray myself as tech forward. So if I have AI tools that I'm using, I'm always eager to share that with clients. But I think that's something that can and should be left to an attorney's professional judgment, at least when it comes to client disclosures.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Have you, what is your personal policy with your clients? Do you disclose it to them in the retainer agreement or something like that?
So I haven't started putting it into the retainer agreement, but I do use AI to record client meetings. And so when I've done that, I've explained to clients that my recording system has AI transcription. I'm going to be recording them so that I can produce a transcript and explain explain what the benefits are and how, it's easier than reading my handwriting and I can focus on what they're telling me. So, and they've all been, very accepting of that. And it's something I may start putting in some of my engagement agreements. I haven't thought about that, about if I'll do it on a regular basis or not.
It's so useful because, like what you just mentioned, something as simple as taking notes on the side without having to have an assistant in the room with you or have that additional expense of that. And it takes notes, it summarizes it so that I know when I look back at my chicken scratch, I can't make heads or toes of it sometimes.
I know, me either.
Yeah. In some ways, these tools have really helped us to amplify our effect. And I think actually it makes becoming a solo or small firm a much more attractive thing because those kinds of barriers to entry of having to do all of these things on your own have now not been lifted entirely, but it's like having a 10-speed bike, instead of a single gear.
Yeah, no, it's really enormous because I mean, like I said, when I started my practice, it was pre-email, and I would have to go to a library to do research at night, or I would have to go to the Hill to get a copy of legislation, go to the court to get a brief. And then if I had to find a sample contract, I mean, I'd have to call around to colleagues and see if they would send me something, fax me a sample agreement. So just being able to access those kinds of resources that at one time were so hard to come by is just life-changing. And of course, having a tool that can do a lot of these things, you can automate phone calls. You don't necessarily have to hire a receptionist. It can do a lot of work that a paralegal might do. I mean, it's completely game-changing.
So let me ask you a little bit about that. If and by the way, have you written a new like a update to your book about the AI tools?
So I'm very tempted. I said that the last one was going to be my my last update. The last one was the third update, but AI came out right. That was released in February 2022. So I have thought about doing some kind of addendum because it really it changes so much.
Yeah. So I was going to ask you, for anybody out there right now who's like, maybe they're getting laid off, maybe they just have had enough of big firm culture, and they want to own their own firm. How would you recommend? Like, what would you recommend to them that would be a different way of starting now? Or what would be those first steps that you would recommend to them that they should take in owning their own firm?
I mean, I think one thing I would do is I would have conversations with ChatGPT or Claude just to kind of start getting your brain flowing and to, kind of get feedback on some of your different ideas. So instead of writing a traditional business plan, have some interactive conversations to kind of flesh out some of the markets that you might address or come up with different practice ideas. I mean, I think the core of starting the law firm is always the same. You still got to let people know that you're open for business. You have to ask people for referrals and and educate clients. But you can also, like I said, there's so much you could do with AI to just do a whole client education week on wills or trust. You could pick wills off the internet and just, summarize different points with AI. I mean, you could just generate so much content that summarizes materials for clients, explains how the court process works. And you could just put out like droves of it. It used to be that, you would spend like a couple of hours a day working on that while you were kind of getting your firm up and running. And now it's much faster. And then I think if I were starting something today too, I would also be looking at where AI is going in the future. So if you're doing an immigration practice or an estate planning practice, or any kind of practice that might lend itself to forms, I would start, in addition to just providing traditional legal services, start thinking, 5 or 10 years forward about what AI might be doing in terms of helping to improve the automation of this process, and maybe even consider offering small automated tools or chatbots or something like that to clients, because I think that we're going to start seeing those changes over the next, I think even though AI is moving quickly, I think the practical application of it is a little bit slower. So it may not be like 5 or 10 years that people come to expect those kinds of things. But, you always want to be out in front rather than behind.
Yeah. And I can't imagine where it's going to be in 5 or 10 years from like a technical standpoint, what's going to be possible. But I totally agree with you that people at large, like their uptake of these tools and like it socially and culturally becoming part of the fabric of our lives is going to take longer for that to have that effect.
Right.
Yeah. And those all sound like Fantastic. Those are fantastic recommendations. The first one I didn't even think of, which is a great application of AI, which is just use it as a business partner, right? Just talk to it, see what it thinks, get some feedback.
Well, that's what there's that book that just came out by Ethan Mollick, Co-Intelligence. That's a very quick listen or read. And he actually developed a ChatGPT tool called the Innovator, which is you can use to generate, business plans for startups, but it works just as well for law firms. I guess it's not as creative with law firms, but you don't even need to use that specific tool. Just talking to it, can give feedback. And that's a place where a lot of lawyers get jammed up, is like putting the business plan. I mean, you could do like a simple one-page business plan, which is what I have always told people to do anyway, just because, you don't want to spend 9 months doing this 50-page business plan. But now you don't even have to prepare it. You can just talk to, it's like you say, it's your co-pilot or your co-counsel or your co-agent. So
one other thing I wanted to talk to you about was the Killing Solo Softly talk that you gave.
Oh, yes.
And if you don't mind sharing some of that with the audience, I think it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, so that was a talk I gave when the Jane Reardon, and now it's Mark Palmer, the civility project. And what is it called again?
To Civility.
Yeah, to civility. And they would have speakers. And so I talked about how regulations were really stifling solos and making it solo and small firms, and making it very difficult for them to compete with non-law firm providers. And so some of the examples I gave, for example, is, if LegalZoom holds its, puts on its page that we have the best lawyers, it can do that. And somebody can search best lawyers and come up with the LegalZoom page. But if I were to say I'm the best lawyer in Maryland, I'd get a bar complaint. So, and the same thing goes for testimonials. In some states, you still can't post testimonials on your website. LegalZoom has millions of testimonials from people who have used their services. And so I pointed out some of those discrepancies and talked about how it's very difficult for solos and small firms to compete with these larger companies, and how it also increases their costs. I guess one of my other things is to get rid of trust accounts, just because, again, when you use a product like LegalZoom, you pay by credit card. Most consumers are prepared to pay by credit card, which in my view provides adequate protection. Trust accounts, I mean, there's nothing wrong with the idea of trust accounts, but I think that they've been weaponized by the Bar Association, especially against, it's been shown in California, especially against lawyers of color. And that's just disgusting. I mean, there's examples of somebody who put money into the trust account just to have it there as a buffer. And he was, accused of commingling and was like, I think he lost his license for like 3 or 6 months. I mean, that kind of thing is ridiculous. And I don't think it's just, again, an unnecessary cost for attorneys. I think a Clio study said that lawyers spend like 2 to 3 hours a week reconciling their trust accounts. So that was another recommendation I thought that could help solo and small firm lawyers compete. So my argument isn't that, a lot of people would say, shut down LegalZoom and shut down all of these self-help services. And that's never been my position. There's obviously a demand for them. And honestly, a lot of the clients who use those services are not clients who attorneys would want to represent, because you just can't make it profitable to represent them. If somebody only has $50 to spend on a will and you're charging even $1,000, that's just not going to fly. But at the same time, you don't have to, you can allow those companies to stay in business, but at the same time, you don't have to hobble solo and small firms from, adopting efficiencies or reducing the cost of their practice so that they can compete with these other companies. I just endorse a level playing field. So that was really the point of that talk. And it's something that's important to pay attention to, because I know that in a lot of jurisdictions, a lot of solos and smalls are facing some competition at the margin from some of these companies. So I think it's something that the bar needs to think about. And I think moving forward, I don't think the bar, I mean, as well-intentioned as the bars are, I know sometimes I write about them in less than savory terms, but they're well-intentioned. They want to protect consumers. They just don't have the resources or the knowledge. So I think, I mean, the sort of the newer point that I focus on in the post-Gen AI age is that lawyers are going to have to start following, what the FTC says, what state laws are saying about AI disclosures, what the federal government may or may not do in terms of regulation of AI. I don't think, these little guidance rules that the bars are coming out with are really going to be enough to protect consumers or to ensure that AI is being used responsibly by all law firms. So I think that, the bars should maybe change their focus, because they just can't match the efforts and the resources that these large agencies have, in putting out rules and enforcing the rules. So I think that's really where things have to go, is a move away from self-regulation on those kinds of issues that are kind of beyond, they pertain to protection of the client, but they go well beyond the scope of just, making sure that your client's ring is safe in the security box, or that, you don't inadvertently breach confidentiality.
Yeah, you know what? Solo and small firms, they already have enough of a challenge without all this additional regulation.
Yeah.
And I wonder if, like, maybe it motivates some small or solo firm lawyers to actually create their own legal tech startups, because that way they don't have to deal with as many rules.
Well, I've wondered about that too, because it used to be that, building a site like LegalZoom, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, would have been cost prohibitive. But, the cost of developing a lot of these sites that can generate forms or automate forms has really come down. I mean, I guess people can do that with tools, with LawDroid or the Gavel product that's the basis of the Hello Divorce software. I mean, lawyers can learn how to use those tools, or, engage people to develop products and just sell them themselves. And, they could sell them for just a little bit more than what the other sites are selling them for. So I've wondered about that also. And I mean, you wouldn't have the same economy of scale, but at the same time, the costs are so low that those barriers to entry of setting up your own Maryland-based LegalZoom, or, and there are a lot of attorneys who are selling forms, not necessarily automated ones, but still templates, who do get some extra income from that.
One of the things I have to ask you, because you've been so involved with so many things, are you still staying up till 2 o'clock in the morning?
No.
Like, how do you keep it all going?
So this is really the thing that people don't realize, especially parents. And I feel like this for moms, because you always see moms complaining on these lawyer mom groups, my house is a mess, I can't keep things together. And the reason you can't is because you're doing so many things. And I can see that now. I mean, I went from, having 2 children and 2 dogs to just being a complete empty nester. And you definitely have, I have so much more time on my hands. So it's just much easier to get more things done, and I don't have to stay up, because, no matter how you look at it, unless you have like full-time help, like a fifth parent in the house, or third or fourth parent, and children are just time consuming, and it doesn't just end when they get to high school, or even when they get to college. So I just have more time now.
Well, that makes sense. Right now, I guess I'm kind of a half empty nester. I have a 21-year-old and a 72 daughters, 21 and 17. Yeah, and my 21-year-old is living out of the house, and that's kind of sad, but at the same time, she's enjoying life. And my 17-year-old, she is 17, so she wants nothing to do with us.
Yes.
But yeah, there's definitely more time from that. And when my 17-year-old goes off to college, there'll be even more time.
Yes.
But for now, it's nice to have her at home.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Well, with that, to talk about family, I'd like to ask you about what makes it worthwhile for you, like doing all of this that you've done. You did it while you were raising your daughters. What makes it worthwhile for you at the end of the day? All of this effort.
I guess I like feeling part of the next generation of attorneys who are really just tearing it up. I've seen over the course of my career just how much law has changed, how much more empowered parents are becoming in the workplace, and how people are, especially women and lawyers of color, are, starting these law firms and these new models that are really empowering them and giving them a lot of success. So it just makes me feel good to have been kind of part of that chain, because those firms are serving clients and those clients are changing the law. And it's really helping to advance progress both amongst lawyers and in the legal profession. So I think that's the thing that makes it most important to me now as I wind things down.
Wind things down?
I'm not really winding things down. It feels like I'm winding. I mean, as I kind of reached this next stage now, not winding things down yet, but I've been doing this for a very long time though. So
yeah. Well, I think that motivation to pay it forward that's an admirable one. And I feel similar in some ways, with the American Legal Technology Awards, like gotten to meet so many wonderful people like yourself. And it's just been a real pleasure to have you here today, Carolyn. Thank you so much.
It's been so good to talk to you. So thanks.
And for people that are listening or watching and they want to keep in touch with you and follow you, I know they have many different options.
Yes.
Tell us about them.
They can follow me on LinkedIn at Carolyn Elefant. My website for my law firm is carolynelefant.com. And of course, myshingle.com, my blog.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Carolyn. I appreciate it. And for everyone watching and listening, thank you so much for watching the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. See you next time.
Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.